It took me almost 9 years to write this book,
Hmm.
probably longer. And it was one of those things, I actually have reinvented a couple of times. I was a TV executive before I was a documentary film producer, and I had a lot of success as a TV producer as well. And I think that we can get trapped by things that we're good at but don't necessarily love. And it was in each instance, it was feeding me in specific ways because I'm a creative person, and there were all these different outlets for my creativity, and they weren't necessarily the exact right ones that were going to feed my soul, but they were good enough, and they were exciting, and they were things that I thought I should want, and so it was easy to kind of put aside my my passion for writing, or at least do it around the edges of my life rather than really focusing on it. And it really, it happened in baby steps over time, but the biggest leap that I took really did come after my sister passed, because it felt like your sense of life and the fragility of it and how much time you have to get things done. And I just felt like if I do not write this book, it will be my greatest regret in life, without any kind of hyperbole. Like, that will be it. And so whatever fear was keeping me from doing it, I had to finish.
Welcome to Midlife Remix, the podcast that explores midlife transitions and how people have reshaped their careers and lives to focus on what truly matters. I'm Steven Miyao, a coach who helps guide professionals through these often challenging but rewarding pivots. In each episode, we share real stories, practical insights, and compassionate advice to help you find balance, purpose, and fulfillment. I'm thrilled to welcome Essie Chambers to the podcast. Essie has been a very successful television producer, movie producer, and collaborated with some of the most prominent names in that space. Her work as a producer includes the Oscar shortlisted documentary Descendants. She's now stepping into a new role as an author with her debut novel, Swift River, already a Barnes & Noble's 2024 Book of the Year finalist, and a Read with Jenna Today show book club pick. We'll dive into her incredible journey of reinvention, what inspired this shift, and how she's navigating this exciting new chapter. Welcome, Essie.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Talk to me about your first pivot and what prompted that.
I went from journalism to Nickelodeon. Talk about a leap. And that was just a leap from something that wasn't working for me to something. I just was like, anything that I could find, that was creative and interesting, I was gonna take. I think a lot of my big pivots have happened in that way, where I said yes to terrifying things because I was kind of running from something else. And I think it took a long time to kind of be more intentional about what I was saying yes to. But in that instance, I said yes to a thing that just seemed so fun and interesting. I didn't, it's very random, journalism to Nickelodeon, but it was one of the best things that I'd ever done. I mean, I learned everything I know about storytelling in this really beautiful bubble of a department. We were doing short films, experimental short films, and then I went on to with these incredible teams of people launch channels, and then I ended up at Nickelodeon Movies, and then I went on to BET. And my last job at BET, I worked for a channel called Centric, and I was the senior vice president of original programming and music programming. And I lost my job. That's a thing that happens all the time in television, but it never happened to me before. And I realized, there was a kind of a bootstraps moment that could have happened where I popped back up and went and got another executive job. And there was something in me that was kind of burnout and worn down in a way that I couldn't. I mean, if I'm looking at like moments of bravery for myself, it was like the choice not to keep doing the thing I was doing. That was the first moment of bravery, is that I let myself kind of be lost and fumble for a minute after that. And not everyone has the luxury to do that. That's a definitely, I had savings, I had the and that was a luxury to be able to, I didn't stop working, but I took things that were more interesting to me. And I moved around with like, just not, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I just knew that I wasn't ready to go back to being an executive. And it turned out I still not ready to go back to being executive. I was never ready again. And so that thing of starting to say yes to things that I was more connected to. I don't know. There was a certain point where I also started to think about legacy, and legacy building, and as a way to help my filter in making choices, and was like, is this something that I want as part of my legacy? And then, so I produced one documentary, and I ended up deciding to go back to grad school in the middle of all of that. So I was just kind of freelancing. I was a combination of producing documentaries. I was also consulting on for TV networks and production companies on content, just kind of like low-hanging fruit things that I was good at, but that again I wasn't pursuing with any kind of major strategy. A lot of seed planting. I mean, that's what I tell people. It's like I planted seeds for like 10 years and then everything came up at one time. And the documentary that I had, Descendant, that I was working on for and that I said yes with my whole heart. I mean, it was my parents are civil rights activists. They met in the civil rights movement, and they were activists and educators. And I think that I often look for things. I want to make them proud, obviously, and I want my work to feel like activist work in a way. And that's hard to do when you're making TV and film. And Descendant was the first thing that really felt like I was working. It was like social justice for the team that was doing that. And I had started writing more in earnest. And my sister passed around this time, and then I created the space to finish. And so yes, it wasn't sort of like sharp turn pivots. It was slow saying yes to things that had meaning to me, and then all of a sudden I was making big leaps.
What I tell my clients is that your next job is not the final job that you're going to have.
That's right.
And that you need to prepare yourself for this journey rather than for the end state, because the journey is going to continue. And this is exactly what you did. So you planted those seeds, as you said, as part of this journey, and you did many different smaller things that then enabled you to be able to get the bigger opportunities that felt more like you. And you're growing into who you really are, which just means that you're on the right track because you're evolving, but there's no end state to this journey.
That's exactly right. And sometimes you don't have the perspective to understand that that's what you're doing. The two things for me as a writer is developing a personal integrity and a connection to my gut. Because I think that what happens often when you're not doing things that you want to be doing is you learn a kind of dissociation, because that's the way that you can do things you don't want to be doing. Is that because if you really feel the pain of that it just sucks. And so dissociation does not serve writing, where you have to be connected to how you feel in order to write something real and true. And so I had to unlearn some of that, those things that enabled me to keep moving, but that they got in the way of me writing. And then the personal integrity part, I think that when we are making big leaps, we often I'm sure you deal with this all the time. We set goals that aren't realistic, just unrealistic goals. And then there's a setup for failure. And then you're beating yourself up for not meeting the goals. And so my developing my writing practice was coming to an understanding about what worked for me, and reconfiguring what the kind of goals that would give me confidence, that would not make me, so it wasn't about writing, 10 pages a day. It was about just showing up to my desk to, like I needed small steps in order to feel good about what I was doing. So I developed the kind of personal and professional integrity to give me the confidence to make the bigger steps.
In what way has your experience enabled you to to adapt to change as well, as it seems like from looking at your career?
It's a question of resilience, right? What we're talking about, and adaptability. And I do, and I don't know if it comes from trauma or comes from my family or it's innate, but I do. There's a kind of self-reliance and a fight in me that just is. But it just many years and therapy and all of these other things that I think I needed in order. You need tools to process that stuff. That's how you become resilient, is that you have to understand how to integrate those hardships into who you are in your life. And it's that process of integration that's so essential. And, I think writing is a part of that. That's an outlet that I use to do some of that processing. I think I have a very high tolerance for chaos and crazy, which is part of that adaptability. And that has served me. And sometimes it hasn't. I often will stay too long in relationships, in jobs. I will make leaps into things that I think I can manage, even though there are lots of signs that say this is probably not a good thing. And I think that when you are incredibly adaptable, that is you also have to match that ability to adapt and change to your gut and the information that you're getting about whether or not something is right for you. And those things didn't always line up for me. And so yeah, I think the adaptability has served me, and sometimes not.
That I think that's very important to think about, because a lot of people experience that, where they've learned to be tough because of the way they grew up.
Yes.
And then they don't know when to leave, or they don't know when to say this is enough, or I'm no longer gonna tolerate this.
Yeah, that's right. I don't
And
have
so,
to. Yeah.
is there a specific experience that you've had that taught you how to step away?
I think it's any one experience. I feel like it is when I have been stuck, it's always, there is a fear, we're all have the fear of failure thing in us, and it's very loud for me. I'm very hard on myself. And so often it's understanding, it's thinking through what the very worst thing is that can happen. And is that what would happen if the worst thing happened? Am I going to be able to keep moving and keep, and usually the answer is yes. And then it's also having experienced enough of those moments, whether they were small or large, where the world didn't stop after very bad things happened. And so it wasn't the things, it was the understanding that, okay, I just, it's never going to feel that way forever. Things are never going to be fixed in one place. I mean, change, as we know, like, change is the only thing that's guaranteed. And so it's like that muscle, that developing that muscle, that understanding that, that you can keep moving despite adversity.
I think about this a lot too when I look at younger people, a lot of younger people, and every setback or every win is so monumental to them. And now when I look at my life, it's smoothened down a little bit. Doesn't mean that I don't get moments of fear where I feel the same way again. It's like, oh, this is the end of the world. I don't know, what am I going to do? But then, as you said, I do remind myself, you've been through much harder things. And those really hard things that you went through were way harder than what you're dealing with now.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to get on with it.
I lost my younger sister almost 5 years ago. It'll be 5 years next week. And then I lost, my father passed away just days before I got my book deal, actually. And particularly with my sister, I mean, my sister, it's like she was too young to die, and it was just a kind of unspeakable loss that I'll never be over. And I think that's part of it is that's the relationship to resilience, right? Like grief, because it's never ending. There's no point at which the pain will go away the way that for myself. It's just about my relationship to it that will change. And so, and talk about the worst thing happening and then I'm still standing. That was the absolute worst thing I think that will ever happen to me. And so understanding grief has really, and I'm still trying to process and understand it, but that impulse to just get up and keep moving is maybe help you in the short term, but it's not a long-term strategy. And so I think that applies to any kind of adversity or hardship, is that you've got to kind of sit with it.
Yeah. Yeah. This is very important what you said, which is that you never get over it, but you learn how to live with it
That's right.
and continue. In some way, maybe it inspires you to do things that you might have otherwise not been able to do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that
don't,
makes sense.
yeah,
Did you always want to be a writer?
always. From I didn't know what that looked like, but I always wanted to write books. I wanted to write books and I wanted to be a backup singer.
I find it interesting that you always knew that you wanted to be a writer. I, growing up, did not know what I wanted to be at all. I wanted to be James Bond, but that was not really, in the cards.
But that's the equivalent though. Right. It was such an abstract thing. I also didn't give myself permission to just go do it. I might as well have been saying I wanted to be James Bond, because I took all routes that were like very responsible, practical routes. I mean, journalism was a bit of a leap, but I don't know. There's something about writing books that felt much scarier and much like just completely without a net, in a way that I could not give myself permission to just do. And so even in the knowing, it was like I did all of these creative things around it and not. And
then your sister passed, and that gave you the strength to then jump in or lean in.
I had been writing for a long time before, and she was one of my biggest supporters. So I'll tell you that the couple of the main moments for my writing career, I think, I was, when I was working in television, I was helping other writers with their passions in their, and so that was satisfying, but I was, obviously I was neglecting my own, but it was just creative enough. At a certain point, I joined a writers group, and that was of other writers that were in similar places like me, where we were helping other writers write, but neglecting our own stuff. And so that was the first moment where I gave myself permission to feel like a writer. And so as far as for other people and sort of creating their strategy and their paths, like community, for me, that was so important, to build a writing community of like-minded people who were going to support that transition for me. So that was the first step. And then it was many, many years until I went back to grad school, because I recognized for myself, and again, key to life is knowing yourself. Needed academia. I needed the structure in order to further my craft. I just felt like I was stuck in ways that I needed to be I needed to be immersed in it. And so, and I also knew that I needed even more community, because, I coming from TV and film, you understand what a network actually does for you. And so my teachers were rock stars. My classmates are brilliant novelists and editors and agents. And so I did exactly that, as I sort of built a network and developed my craft. I started my book in grad school. I started the frame of it. I had been working on pieces of the story before that, but I started the frame of my book in grad school. And I think it wasn't until my sister passed that I leaned all the way into, like, this has to be finished. This is not, I cannot be just the girl that's always working on her novel, because that's what I was the girl that was always finishing her novel. And that was not, I had to do it. I had to, so yeah, that's what. But she was, and she was such a she was a writer herself. She was a playwright and a photographer, and watching her battle with chronic illness, she had lupus. I think it forces a kind of clarity and perspective when you are dealing with that kind of pain and you are facing your own mortality. That I think I watched her develop her artistry with that kind of clarity and focus. And I mean, she was incredibly inspiring. But what she fought to be an artist through the kind of pain that she was in, and so having that model also of an artist was really inspiring to me as well.
Yeah, I think that being an artist is even more scary than any other endeavor where you're really going on your own, right? And you've talked about this, that you had a life in yeah, corporate America, entertainment, and you had always a team around you
That's right.
and people that you could bounce things off, people who supported you, people who you supported, and then you were able to find the academic community that provided you the same kind of structure. But then you finally made this leap to now you're just yourself
Yes.
as the writer, but also as the person that has to promote the book. Talk about that experience and how much courage that had to take to be able to get to that point.
I mean, it's terrifying. And I will say that I have an incredible team. The writing part was very much a solitary act, but everything that came after, the editing process, that takes it from, that's the thing that gives it the structure and the polish and all of the things that makes it an actual book. So I had a wonderful editor. I did a lot of editing with my agent. And then I had an incredible marketing team. And so lots of team stuff. But yes, at the end of the day, I was used to being part of projects, even if they were really high profile, where I was standing behind a team of, standing next to or behind people. It was never just me out in front. And that was, and still is, a terrifying thing, because it is getting comfortable with, there's nothing that I care more about than my writing and this book. There's nothing that makes me feel more vulnerable. And so the stakes feel so impossibly high, and I feel like a very fragile a lot of the time. I did think that I was taking this private thing that I'd been living with in a cave for so long, and then making it public. But there is a kind of an intimacy that I didn't anticipate, which comes from the actual exchange that I have with the readers, who are sharing the things that make them vulnerable and telling me their stories. And that is very, it was just an unexpected gift, and a thing that allows me to continue to be vulnerable, just because that exchange is very, very soul feeding. Our greatest strengths are also our greatest weaknesses. And so when you're out of balance, and my sensitivity is my superpower, because I'm an incredibly empathetic person, and I can breathe life into characters and worlds because of that empathy. And then when I'm out of balance, everything feels personal. And you can knock me over with a feather. And that is a very dangerous thing when you are going from being a writer to being an author out in the world talking about your book, because not everyone's going to like not everyone's going to like what you put out there. And so I've had to work very hard at the things that bring me balance, so that I can not get knocked over by a feather.
Yeah. So what does balance mean for you, and how did you go about getting that balance?
The routines in my life, I have to be eating well, I have to be getting exercise, I have to be getting outside, I have to be in contact with nature. It's making sure that I don't self-isolate. I also need people, and I need my friends and my community.
Yeah, isn't it so hard when you're specifically when you're under a lot of pressure, and when the stakes are high in your life, and it's not always public, often it's very private, to actually then keep that balance. I find it's much easier when things are easy to do all those things that you said,
Yes.
and then once really you get stressed, and you skip some of the workouts, and you eat a little more junk food, and you just you don't see your friends as much, and you whatever you leaning into that is your bad behavior, you end up doing, which obviously makes those situations much harder.
So
And you're
true.
supposed to be doing the opposite, but it's just so hard to do.
It's so true, and it takes nothing for that to happen. It's like one thing slips, and then the whole thing topples. For me, anyway. And that's part of the, like, be beating myself up, and that's when you have to kind of have that. For me, like, the integrity building again. It's like, okay, I need to get back to doing a single thing with consistency that's going to make me feel good about everything else again. And so picking that one thing, whatever it is. And also, picking the things that bring you, just small things that bring you joy, is so important when you're not feeling well, and making sure that I'm surrounding myself with the right people, because we have different people in our lives for different things, and you have to be protective of your spirit when you're feeling out of balance and fragile. And so not everybody is for every moment in your life.
And that often, specifically when you're making a pivot, there are going to be a lot of people in your life that will question that, because it's so hard for them to imagine what would you lose by moving from being a successful TV producer to doing documentary films, or to then becoming a writer. So I've experienced that in my life, and a lot of my clients experience it, and it's very hard for them to let go of that. I think in relation to that, and you said this earlier, is that as a writer, you have to be able to not to be influenced by other people's opinion, I guess. And I think that that's so hard, and I think relates to the same thing as when you're making the pivot too. So how do you do that?
I think part of it is, again, going back to talking about the right people I think that there was a certain point where I understood this. It's not about getting rid of people in your life, or but it's surrounding there. When you start encountering people, I'm sure you've had this before. It's like, oh my God, that person, you meet someone, and it's like, that feels like they're in, like, my soul tribe or something like that. That connection where you feel like you are most yourself,
Mhm.
and you start to recognize that more and more. And when you get older, it's hard to maintain. You meet tons of people and you make tons of friends, and it's hard to maintain all the friendships. And I'm bad at juggling all of that. I make friends easily, and then it's like, and so really paying attention to the people that feed you, that make you feel like you are the best version of yourself, and then seeking their counsel, and you know the very, very best, healthiest people in my life are always there to tell me, is that a helpful thought to be thinking that in this moment in time? Is that going to think that all the way through? What will that bring you? That worry? Where will that take you? And that kind of a thing. Like, I do think that sometimes self-talk and all those, like, that's hard to do by yourself, and sometimes you need people to tell you that.
I find it also interesting in regards to the friends that I think that you pull in the friends to give you the advice that you want to have. You don't actually pull in the friends that give you the advice that you don't want to have.
Yeah.
And so recently, I counseled a friend who I knew that he would in retrospect, knew that he would wanted me to take that job because that was the safer thing to do,
Yes.
because he's my safe friend.
Yes.
And it's not actually what I wanted,
That's right.
but it's somehow my intellect wanted to hear that, so that I did the safe thing. And
Yeah.
so it's not that you always get the feedback that you need, but you often sort of seek the counsel that you want.
It's so true.
But it might not be the obvious thing. Yeah. So I think friends are important, very important. And it's good to surround yourselves with obviously people that have different kinds of viewpoints, so that it shapes who you are. But when we're probably never going to do what we are supposed to do just off the bat anyways. We have to go through that experience, right? So if you would have written your debut novel right out of college, it would have been a very different book, and maybe you would have not become an author.
I think that's right. I mean, I needed all of those different versions of myself over all of those years to show up to write this book. And it really showed up with the way that the structure of my book works, because I literally, each layer of the book was developed when I would show up and say, what does this character need? to grow and evolve and move forward. Because I understood it was started off as a coming of age novel, and it became this sweeping epic family saga because I had to ask myself, I know what she's running from, but what is she running towards? And so I don't think that I would have had, it was only an older version of me that really understood that that's what this story needed anyway. And by the time I went to grad school, I had so much more to say. I mean, I was developing my craft, but I just don't think I had the same, I didn't have as much to say that if I had done that right out of undergrad. I wouldn't have gotten the same thing from it.
Yeah, it's how interesting how life really shapes you to this is so obvious to become the person that you actually are.
Yeah, that you were meant to be.
Yeah, that you're meant to be. I can definitely relate to that. I feel more myself now than I've ever been my entire career. Doing something that I love. Before, I don't think that I ever truly loved what I was doing. I was doing it because I was good at it, and I was doing it because I was able to provide for my family. And then finally now having the courage, and also of course good fortune to be able to do what I love doing, to thinking about how we can evolve as people and helping other people, in the process.
Did you not know that until you were actually doing this thing? Did you think that that was the case with the other jobs that you had? Because I do think being good at something is a real trap, and it can make you feel like you're happy and satisfied when you're really not on a much deeper level.
I think it's very complicated. I
Yeah.
think it's we want things to be sort of a, 2-3 variable kind of equation, and life is unfortunately like a 100,000 variable equation, and it's very hard to solve it because you don't know what all the pieces are.
Yeah.
A lot of it has to do with self-confidence, where you are, I think, at the time, or where I was. And then the fear of not being able to provide, I think, is also very real for a lot of people.
Yes.
It can be real. A lot of people, it's not always super real. And then once they actually tally up the amount of money that they have and what they truly need, they realize that they don't need all of this other stuff, and they actually can take the risk to jumping into something new. But then I think, as I told you, like, I wanted to be James Bond when I was a kid because I like the travel and the glamour and the excitement, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I don't think that until recently I knew what I wanted to do.
Mm.
So some people have the fortune of being super passionate when they're young and they're living their dream. My daughter is like that, and it scares me because she's so much like that, and I've always tried to instill that in her because that's what I would like to be. But then when somebody truly does it, it's actually quite scary,
So
specifically when
true.
it's your child.
That's so true. I mean, yeah, but I think it's that thing you were saying before of like, I think we often make our dreams like impractical. And so maybe there was a part of you that understood that this, we didn't have a name for what this is that you're doing now, but understood that there, I'm sure the kind of work you're doing has always sparked you in a way that it's like, you know, maybe it wouldn't have even occurred to you to make that as a, your profession.
Yeah, that's probably true. It's
But
probably.
whatever is making, all of the things that make you good at this have always been present, but the understanding that like, oh, I can actually make a living doing this does, you're right, it does take a kind of confidence. I don't know that I certainly didn't have it for a very long time. And I think for me it also took a kind of a reframing. Like, I don't know that I won't make another documentary film.
Mhm.
I know I won't be an executive again, but I don't know that I won't tell stories in other mediums. And so some of it is also for me, and I feel like this latest generation is very good at this. Like, I'm a storyteller.
Yeah.
And so saying that I'm a storyteller does free me to make choices in a different way. I don't have to live inside a box of being, writing books. Writing books is what is my, that's my passion, my soul feel. But it may be that I try and adapt a book and then make a, it can show up in different ways. And I think that, yeah, I mean, for me, that reframing was important for me.
Yeah, it is. I think it is about the journey, and understanding that you've only gotten here because you did the journey that you did. And if you would have not done that journey, even though some of it was super painful and maybe for some people horrific, and happy and all of that, you would not be the person that is capable of doing this. I don't think that I would have been, if I didn't live my life, I don't think I would have been able to do this profession.
Yeah.
I think that all of my hard experiences enabled me to be more empathetic. And I now no longer, because I had so many mistakes or failures, that I don't look down on people, because I was like, I had the same thing, or I struggled with the same thing, and I'm no better than any of you. And so, yeah, it is a journey. It is a journey, and hopefully you just get better at what you do. But of course, there'll be something that will set you back, and that will propel you then further because of that setback.
Well, now that I'm a writer, I mean, now that I am fully, I'm making my living at writing, like, yeah, I know I can write about it. That's always it's like, whatever happens and whatever, the saying, like, don't mess with a writer because, you're going to get, I say that all the time now, I use everything. I repurpose everything. And I really do understand in a deep way, especially, I have a document because I'm already starting to think about my next book, and you just kind of listen in a different way when you're in the process of writing and building characters in a world. And everything is, you use everything. You use funny things you hear, you use crazy things you hear, and you use your trauma and the painful stuff that's happening. And you start to form language around it. And that is really empowering when you can put language to this terrible thing that's happening to you. Sometimes it doesn't, I'm not, doesn't matter if you're getting over it or, it's just that you understand what's happening.
Yeah. You pay attention. I think that good writers, and that's true for any format of writing, they pay attention to a certain detail that regular folks don't.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
Because the best books and the best stories, are often about nothing. But that nothingness is this detailed observation about something that most people would have never paid attention to. And that's what we as humans can relate to, which makes those stories so powerful.
Yeah. It's all in the details. It really
Yeah.
is.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. I want to close out with, are there any books or podcasts or things that you've consumed that you think will be helpful for people that are on this journey and trying to grow and trying to make some pivots in their lives?
I remember, for me, it was, the theme was always stuckness. That was always the thing that I felt like was happening with me. And so
Yeah.
I remember reading a book called Getting Unstuck, and
Yeah.
listening to podcasts that are about getting unstuck and spinning. And because I think paralysis is very painful when you see a thing you want and you can't move, and all of those things that you do, it's just painful.
Yeah.
We've all experienced it. Had you heard of the book Getting Unstuck?
I have. I don't think I've read this one, but I have heard of it. And now that you say it, I'm going to pick it up.